it's a contested term. It's a term that is not necessarily agreed on. I mean, some people have said that there is no such thing as austerity, and I'm sympathetic with that in the sense that what austerity really is the modern face of neoliberalism, and by that process of inequality, cuts to essential services, and scapegoating of poor people for problems that exist far across society, and it's been called austerity. And this term, what happened is the coalition government have engaged with this term. They've kind of really put it to the forefront and used it as a justification to do the kinds of services and cuts the kinds of services that is part of their ideological interests anyway. So I think it's a term that's being mobilised in order to undertake some absolutely savage cuts to health services, social care services, benefit and welfare services, and it allows it some legitimacy, because it's called austerity. They use those very simple analogies. People have to tighten their budgets, we're in debt, we have to save. Well, actually, there's not really, if you look at the figures, there's not actually been a massive change in our own debt and our capacity to service our debt as a nation in the last 10, 20 years. What's happened recently is there's been an appreciation that the public have had to pay an awful lot of money to save the banks as a result, and that was as a result of financial deregulation. It was as a result of poorly administered organisations, huge and irresponsible lending across the board, and the public, I think, have got an appreciation that they've had to pick up the can for this. They had to carry the can. And I think it's fundamentally unfair, and I think whenever people mobilise that term austerity, I'm very, very concerned, because actually I think it's not necessarily about the country doing its bit and saving money. I think it's actually about blaming people for the problems that have happened with others. Neoliberalism is the way you could describe how our economy has been run for the last 30 years since Thatcher got in 1979. That essentially, and also in America, there are different ways of organising capitalist economies. Neoliberalism is one particular way, and it's where the idea, as you say, big government is bad, public spending is a poor thing, government involvement in the lives of people is a poor thing, and that it should be the free market that decides, because a free market, unfettered, deregulated, will actually end up being the best for all people. Privatisation of services is a key element of this, and responsibilisation. That's one of the key things about neoliberalism. There's this idea of responsibilising people, of taking issues which are social, economic, political, and encouraging normal people to be responsible, to feel responsible for them. Now, there are certain things that people can take responsibility for, but there's an awful lot of things they can't take responsibility for. Individual people can't take responsibility for the fact that, for instance, George Osborne is over lobbying the EU as we speak at the present in order to stop them from bringing in caps on bankers' bonuses. Now, if you stop bringing in caps on bankers' bonuses, that is going to potentially contribute to the exact same problem we saw in 2008. You can't responsibilise individual people for that. And neoliberalism is something, it's a way of doing economics, it's a way of managing people, a way of managing a population. And some people would say it's the best way, it's the most efficient way, the most effective way. Austerity is a way of justifying those, because actually it's very, very difficult for a government to come in, to take power and to say, right, we're going to cut the NHS services, we're going to try and privatise as many of these services as we can, we're going to cut social care, we're going to cut benefits, we're going to do all of these things. Unless you've got a rationale where people can come to buy in, or some people can come to buy into that, it's very difficult to do that. And so a government, like our government, like other governments, have a lot of pressures. They've got the pressure of the media, they've got the pressure of individual people and groups of people in society, they've got the pressure of funders for the parties, they've got the pressures of lobbyists from private healthcare companies, and they all want the government to act in a certain way. And I think that neoliberalism is an expression, a public expression of the dominance of private healthcare industries, lobbyists and party funders in terms of the direction of the government at the expense of the people who elected government in the first place. But it's very difficult to enact that and to convince people that it has legitimacy. Austerity allows them to do that. Essentially, neoliberalism is a form of capitalism, and capitalism works in different ways. It can work in ways that are quite beneficial to people, and it can work in ways which are really not beneficial to people. There's no simple dichotomies here. Good capitalism, capitalism is good or is bad. You're right. Neoliberalism, the intellectual ideas of neoliberalism came well before the 1980s. I mean, neoliberalism, the fact it was tried, it was brought in the West as a response to the problems that were occurring in the UK in the 1970s. But actually, if you read, it was a fantastic book, The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, it was tried out well before in other countries. In Chile, for instance, when they brought in General Pinochet in the early 70s, and they did all of the changes, massive changes, except that at that time, Chile wasn't a democracy, so essentially they could bring them in without any real need for justification. They didn't need an austerity discourse in Chile, they had the army. So the army just kind of brought these things in, and you saw massive privatisation, huge cuts in public services. Anyone who disagreed was arrested, many people were killed or were made to disappear. And it caused massive social, political, health difficulties in that country and other countries in Latin America. So it's not new. This set of ideas isn't necessarily new. But Britain is a functioning democracy. Now, some people would question the degree to which it's a democracy, but it's a functioning democracy in the sense that people are still voted in to represent them in parliaments and local councils. And therefore, the way in which neoliberalism has taken expression in Britain is quite different. It's come in and it's taken expression, and it needs buy-in. It needs buy-in from the press, it needs buy-in from the public. You have to convince people with discourses and arguments, whereas in Chile they didn't necessarily have to do that. And that's what we see now. We see austerity being mobilised in order to do that. It's quite a seductive story, the story being that at the moment, we are, as a country, in an awful lot of problems. We're in deep, deep debt because we spend too much on welfare, because the people who use welfare are skivers. They don't try to make any kind of effort to go out there. There are plenty of jobs out there for people if they want them, and we have a huge number of people on welfare benefits, and the reason they're not taking the jobs is because they're fundamentally lazy, and they need to be addressed. That's a seductive story for somebody who already is quite inclined to think like that. Remember, we've had 30 years of these messages being disseminated in the public. They have some popularity, not universally, but they have a lot of popularity. So it's quite a seductive message, but ultimately, if you look at the actual statistics, if you look at the figures and the experiences of people who are using benefits and welfares, what we're essentially seeing is the vast majority of people who are using welfares and benefits are doing it because they have no choice. 54% of the people in poverty in this country right now are working. They're living in poverty and they're working. The biggest amount that we're seeing, or one of the most substantial proportion of benefits, are in-work benefits, and the people are paid in-work benefits because the wages we have at the moment are not sufficient. We've seen a stagnation of wages, people being paid less and less in terms with regards to real costs. And as a result of that, as a result of employers not paying enough, as a result of this downward pressure on wages, people are going into more and more debt. They're using credit cards and loans and so on and so forth, and they're now receiving benefits just to top up so they can afford, the absolute essentials. That's what we're talking about. The people who are often using these benefits, these are in-work benefits. I mean, I actually think it's absurd that you would have in-work benefits, but we have a lot of people needing to use in-work benefits, and an awful lot of people are using benefits who are out of work, not because they're lazy or because they're skiving, but because there isn't enough decent work to do. And that's a key element, decent work. There's this idea that we've seen an increase in 0 hours contract, we've seen deregulation has hit the job market, so you've got more and more jobs that are temporary, that are low paid, that don't pay sickness benefits. So my own personal feeling is, in terms of benefits, that's not the problem. That is not the problem we have in this country. We have record inequality, income inequality in this country. We have something in the region of 100 billion tax avoidance in this country, okay? We've got something in the region of 5 billion to 15 billion being wasted on unnecessary internal reforms in the NHS. There's a lot of problems. At the moment, RBS is a public owned company. They've just paid themselves £600 million pounds worth of bonuses to themselves at a time when RBS is still failing. It's still losing money. We're doing nothing about that. That's a publicly owned institution. There are clear problems in this country. But if you want to look at where the money's being wasted, where publicly money is being wasted, it is not on welfare. The problem at the moment is that in terms of engaging with the democratic system, the alternatives are thin on the ground. We have the three main parties used to represent some form of alternatives. We had a functioning left, which represented what you might call broadly a more socialist take. You had Liberal Democrats and you had the Conservatives. Now, at the moment, if you actually look at all three of those main parties have bought into the austerity consensus. You know, at the moment, it's about performing for financial markets. It's about performing for the media, for the right-wing media, and it's about showing their austerity credentials and to perform and to be visible and make it clear they're not going to tamper with this income inequality. We can be trusted not to tamper with this income inequality. So, in terms of what do people do? Well, there are. If you want to engage, if you want to engage politically, there are organisations out there you can engage with politically that are absolutely against this consensus. Go out and vote Green for a start. Now, people might, I don't like the Green Party, the environment. Look at the policies of the Green Party. I'm not a member of the Green Party. I've never been a member of the Green Party, but the Green Party are particularly strong in the Brighton area. They've got an MP, Carolyn Lucas, who has consistently stood up against all of these things we're talking about in Parliament. Get out there and vote for her. If you see you've got councillors standing in the local elections for the Greens, vote for them too. There is a clear political party that is willing, and now at the moment they're a political party who do not have the same kind of populist base as the other main parties. But those kind of changes only come about with people voting for them. So if you're pissed off about this and you don't like it, go out there and vote for them, because there is an alternative and people are providing an alternative and they're fighting against all of the things that we're talking about here. That's the first thing I would say that people would do. Other things is, if you've got any, and some people don't believe, some people they've left democracy behind, and I don't blame them. You know, you hear Russell Brand saying, don't vote, don't get involved, and I've got sympathy with that, because as I said, we have a creaking democracy in this country. But get out there, if you've got any faith in it at all, write to your councillors, contact them, get together in groups and lobby and campaign and push. You know, there's people assemblies in Brighton that are operating, there's people assemblies all around the country. Get involved with them, see how you can help. There are people trying to resist this and stand up against it. The Unemployed Family Sector Project itself is a fantastic organisation which has done, in my opinion, done an awful lot of good in this area to try to resist some of these things. There are organisations there, but people can't do it alone, and they can't do it if they're apathetic. They've got to get together with other people and they've got to fight it, either politically or not. From what I can understand, from my limited understanding of Britain and the British people, we don't strike me as a particularly revolutionary people. You know what I mean? There are countries that strike me. There are countries where thousands and millions of people get. You know, something happens in France, they'll have 10 million people out there on the street, pissed off about it. Why in this country are people engaging far less? I don't know. I mean, my worry about Russell Brand is, I think to a degree I agree with all of the things he's saying in the sense we need massive change. He's calling it a revolution. We need massive change, but you're not going to get massive change if the country is organised by. And if you don't vote, who's going to take over these seats? You're going to have people like Simon Kirby in Brighton, that horrible Tory. You know what I mean? You're not going to bring the change you need. You're not going to address these things unless, because as much as I said, our democratic system in this country is dreadful. Without engaging in it, other people will. the people who hold views differently to you, the people who think austerity is a good thing, the people who think that welfare users are skivers, they're the ones who are voting, they're the ones who are getting into Parliament, and they're the ones who are controlling the police and the media and all the rest, and leave people more and more excluded and marginalised. I don't think opting out is going to help. Russell Brand might end up, and his friends may end up proving me wrong. I hope they do. I don't think you can distill it into a message. That's the God's honest truth. And I don't think that even if you could distill it into a message, the ears of the people who are currently running the country are open. I think that people have to form messages, and they have to get together. I mean, I am, it's an irrelevance to the Brighton area because I'm living in Worthing and standing there. I stand for the National Health Action Party. They're an anti-austerity party. They're a pro-public NHS party. And they're a group of people who have started from the ground upwards, and with an idea of trying to get into Parliament, get into the places where you have to make those messages, and that you can, and those messages can be public. And I think that until people get behind organisations like NHAP, Green, so on and so forth, you don't have access to the means to getting those messages public. So I could say something like, David Cameron, stop doing austerity. It's never going to get to David Cameron. If he did, he'd just laugh with his glass of wine and move on, and perhaps to his dinner table with his lobbyists and his bankers and whoever else he dines with. So all I would say to people, the message has to be, it's much more important that the message goes to everyday normal people rather than to the David Camerons of this world. Because if people get together and they try to act on this, and they join or support other parties than the other three, and they get them together in people's assemblies, when David Cameron sees 200,000 or 2 million people marching through the streets of London, he'll get his message then, but only when he sees that.